last thoughts. So today's episode is actually going to be on Pocahontas. So I was talking with some people, running some ideas across them, and they suggested Pocahontas, and I thought about it. Now, my wife, herself being part Native American, Pocahontas is one of her Disney princesses, like one of her favorites. And we all grew up on Disney movies. Like, even if you're not a huge fan of a Disney movie, you've seen something Disney at some point in your lifetime. So I started thinking about it, and I thought it was a good idea because the real story of Pocahontas is actually quite different than the fairy tale that Disney presented. So, most historians actually believe Pocahontas was born around 1595 to a Powhatan chief. Her given name was actually Matoka. Another name was Amante. Although Amante actually meant naughty one and spoiled child. So basically, the tribal members, because she was the chief's daughter and considered a princess, she was honoring. And that's the reason why the other tribal members said naughty one or spoiled child. So it was during her childhood that the English actually came to the New World. Naturally, bloody clashes began between the natives and English, but not right away. So it became a daily part of everyone's lives, meaning the disputes. It was in 1607 that Captain John Smith actually arrived to Virginia by English ships. Now, he brought with him not only the soldiers and himself, but also an additional 100 settlers. Now, one day, John was walking around the beach and exploring, and he was captured by Powhatan hunting parties. Now, this happened in the Chickahominy River area. Now, he was naturally returned to the Powhatan's chief's home at Werawakamoko. I can't pronounce that word, but it's Werowwacomoco. Now, the accounts of the next events actually changed from person to person. In John's own written account to the Queen Anne, he claimed that Pocahontas threw herself across his body to protect him from execution at the hands of her own father. Now, it is widely believed John Smith lied and cheated and was quite boastful about things he didn't do just to try to gain a quick reputation as an accomplished captain and leader in Jamestown as well to the Queen. So he basically had to build his reputation up, that he was the right man for the job. And he wasn't above lying or cheating to do that. So although she was grown in the a grown woman in the Disney version of Pocahontas, in real life, she was no more than 10 years old. Now, it is believed widely that a romance was actually highly unlikely, at least publicly, between John Smith and Pocahontas. And this is due to the fact of she was 10 years old and she was the daughter of the chief. So, however, she was known to be around him quite often. In fact, Pocahontas was often seen in Jamestown within the fort compound playing with other English boys. And she was also there helping out the English with understanding communication between her tribe and English. And in fact, during the winter, whenever their food supplies started growing short, Pocahontas was the one that's responsible for the tribe saving them. In fact, if it wasn't for the local tribes around that area, the settlers at Jamestown would have starved to death. And this isn't a theory, this is a fact. They were not prepared for the winter there, basically. So it was on April 13th, 1613, Samuel Argyle captured her father, Pocahontas' father, to ransom her. All right, hold on one second. So I got my notes wrong here, because actually Samuel Argyle captured Pocahontas to ransom her for her tribe's English prisoners. In fact, the English turned on Pocahontas, and she was held as a prisoner in Jamestown. Now, this is known as Jamestown as a general location for over a year. In fact, it wasn't in Jamestown. It was in a ship outside of Jamestown on a river that she was held as a prisoner. We're going to get into that in a little bit, in fact. So while she was locked up, John Wolfe, a tobacco planter, planned her release. But she would have to agree to marry him. And she did. So Pocahontas was quickly baptized and given a new name, a Christian name, of Rebecca. So in 1614, they became the first recognized English native marital union in history. Naturally, there is more to his motives and his decisions to marry her than what she realized. In fact, it was no more 2 years into their marriage that he made her move to England with him to use her as propaganda and efforts to do a propaganda campaign to support the Virginia's English colonies' efforts to bring Christianity and civilization to, in their eyes, a savage nation. So himself and the Queen wanted to use Pocahontas to symbolize that savages could be tamed. So the result was, when he got there, he was praised as a hero. He was known as the man who tamed the savages and brought Christianity to them, or in their words, to the heathen tribes. While she was in England, Pocahontas bumped into John Smith. Now, people said she actually refused to speak to him. She turned her head quickly and then she ran from him screaming. Now, this is way different than what Disney would let you think in part 2 of that movie. So 1617, they boarded a ship to return home. However, she would not complete her journey. She became very ill, and theories suggest she got smallpox, ammonia, or tuberculosis. And other people said that she had been poisoned by her husband so that no one would ever know the truth about what his intentions were. Meaning, like, when she got home and she talked to her father and the rest of the tribe, there's rumors that he poisoned her solely to kill her before she could go back to her tribe and tell them anything. So she was taken off the ship at Gravesend, in fact. She died March 21st, 1617. Earlier in the episode, does everyone remember when we found out John Smith was known to lie and cheat? Remember when Pocahontas bumped into John Smith and she screamed and ran away? There's an account that stated John Smith was raping her and hurting her, and yes, in all those sick and twisted ways at the age of 10 years old. One account states that once people started interacting with Pocahontas, she wanted to tell her father. That is when she was locked up and held for ransom. Anyways, moving on. So 1616, John Smith wrote to Queen Anne of Denmark in anticipation of Pocahontas' visit to England. The new account stated that his catcher now included the threat of immediate death. And at the minute of his execution, he stated that Pocahontas hazarded to the beating out of his own brains to save his, and that she actually prevailed with her father to safely conduct Jamestown business. Now, naturally, he later changed that story again, although long after Pocahontas' death was the third story that he wrote admitted. He stated in this version, in 1624, that he was captured and taken to the Paramount Chief, where 2 massive stones were brought before the Powhatan tribe, and this was done so all the tribe could beat him with stakes until he was to die. He claimed he bravely dragged the sticks and the rocks himself, and bravely placed his own head in between the 2 rocks to get ready to be beaten to death. He stated that it was when Pocahontas ran up to him, put his head in her arms, and lay down, saying they would have to kill her to kill him. The reason, well, it is simple. He wanted to be the tough little soldier to the Queen and the rest of the English. Really, John Smith was in hot water with the Queen, and he had fallen drastically out of favor with the London Company, which was how Jamestown Enterprises was able to be funded. Plus, Native American historians, as well as her tribe, all state that her tribe did not execute prisoners by beating them to death. They would execute prisoners by tying them up and burning them. Now, his part of the story of becoming friends with Pocahontas is actually true. She always played with the boys in Jamestown, like I said earlier. When they starved, she brought them provisions so much it was said it is the only reason why they were able to survive that harsh first winter. Now, people need to understand how tribes and tribal communities did things back in the day. And really, Pocahontas' father only agreed to give the English a tiny bit of their tribe's land. Really, it is said by her own tribal historians that it was so he could place watch on them and try to control them easier in case they got out of hand. In true English foreign nature, historically speaking, the Jamestown colony said, man, we want more land. So without the permission of the tribal people, Pocahontas and her tribe and other tribes, they just simply started expanding their colony. Now her tribe at that point felt threatened. And why wouldn't they? Up till this point, they had killed natives, took their chief's daughter, brought sickness, and now they're claiming they want more land. So in 1609, an injury from a gunpowder explosion actually was the real reason why John Smith went back to England, simply for medical treatment. Because of the problems that were starting in Jamestown, in theory, some accounts state that Pocahontas was kept in the dark. The tribe stating it was done for her own protection. They told her John Smith was dead. She believed them, and then she quit going to Jamestown. Then one day in England, they bump into each other, and she screams, and she runs away. She either thought that she was seeing a ghost and ran, although I think the fact that he was actually said, it was rumored that he was hurting her, she said nothing at that time period. She was hoping to keep peace between her tribe and the English. And I think that once she heard that they wanted more land and more fighting began, like more violent fighting, it's my thought that when she bumped into him, to her, it was like seeing a monster free in front of her. So, and on top of that, I mean, the girl already went through on top of that, on whatever he did to her in the past, she was also basically forced to marry another guy, and now she's being used as a symbol of peace. So this is really the backstory for the encounter between Pocahontas and John Smith. I say that because it's prevalent on the Disney movie in part 2 of their encounter, and it didn't quite happen the way that they presented it in that. So remember earlier when we were talking about Pocahontas being captured, right? So it actually occurred during the first Angelo Pohatan War, and that's a nice way of saying whites versus the natives. This was a conflict between the Jamestown settlers and their tribe. It began late in the summer of 1609. The first year, Jamestown took control of the James River, both the mouth and the falls. If I memory serves me right, the falls was the point of entry for shipping. So naturally, they would want to take control of that first. So in efforts to help, Captain Samuel Aggle got the Potawatoms, who also lived on the river, although they weren't completely loyal to Pocahontas' tribe. They were considered another tribe, and they weren't exactly loyal to their tribe exclusively. So, and he knew this because a young Englishman named Henry Spelman lived amongst them. Now, March of 1613, Argo heard that Pocahontas was visiting another tribe. She was living under the protection of the Warrants La Passes, also known as the Jazapawas. So Captain Argyle using who they trusted, meaning Spelman, he managed to convince the Japawas to capture Pocahontas. And what's in it for them, would you ask? Well, remember, a different tribe, really like a community set up beside each other. So, They were like neighbors, like another neighborhood. So there was like, yeah, we're cool with them, but if you're offering us something that's worth it, yeah, we might do something for you. You know what I mean? So all the captain eventually had to do was promise a peaceful truce between the English and their tribe and agree to give them some land. So the Jaspawas tricked Pocahontas to boarding the captain's ship. Nobody knows quite how, but there they actually captured her. They ransomed her for release of the English prisoners held by her father and her tribe, as well as a return of various stolen items, weapons and tools mainly. Her father returned the prisoners, however, the English said he failed because all the weapons and tools were not properly returned. So a standoff started off between Pocahontas' life and her father and the tribe and the English. So the English did treat her horrible in their eyes, being their enemies' daughters. So normally what would happen in these time periods, a lot of times you'll get variations of stories. So it's like the leader of them that's holding her capture might be like, we're treating her great. She's a princess. We would have never hurt her. Meanwhile, the other people, you know what I mean, are doing horrible things to her because, well, she's part of the savages in their eyes. So now, granted, I don't know if he participated in raping her as well or not. So it said that by her tribe that he did. But anyways, but kept her alive anyways, meaning they didn't kill her. So during the year standoff that this lasted, and it lasted a year, because of the English, little is actually known accurately of what happened. Of course, their official statement was she was very courageous, she was useful, and she was treated well. However, Little Bear Kostolov claims she was repeatedly raped and tortured. English say no way that would ever happen because it would not help the English efforts in Jamestown and help with the efforts with her father being a chief. So March of 1614, everything went nuts. It just went berserk. You know what I mean? Everything just hit the fan, right? So a violent altercation between hundreds of English and her tribe's warriors on the Pamunkey River. The English encountered tribal elders in the tribe's capital at Machu. The English allowed Pocahontas to talk to her father. It is said that she rebuked him, yelling at him for valuing her less than swords, pieces, and axes. She stated she would rather live amongst the English because they loved her. Although most would say that the English during that year time period that she was held captive was actually brainwashing her. Part of brainwashing, when you get into the psychology, you'll come across an interesting syndrome. It's called Stockholm Syndrome. But anyways, we're not going to get into the definition of that just yet. So, Info believing he actually would rather die than give up the weapons that were not returned than saving his own daughter. So, studying war history as I have, trust me, this tactic has worked since the beginning of warfare history. Tradition states that Pocahontas' first husband, however's name was Kockum, Koccum, brother of Potawatomi. Whereasma Jazapawa, that her husband was killed by the English after Pocahontas was captured in 1113 so that he wouldn't try to rescue her from the ship. So, in actuality, she lived amongst her husband's tribe. So, in proper Native American tradition, she moved in her husband's village. It wasn't that they were protecting her. She was living amongst her husband in their village, and that's their tradition. But the English, being the English, said, oh, they're protecting her. So they convinced the other tribe, because there's three, to help capture her. And the first thing they did was kill her husband because they knew that he would come for her. So anyways, see, they say she was not hiding, that she was living with her husband in his village, and that the chief and elders disliked her father often, which is why it was so easy for the English to convince them to help. Although this is debated by historians, meaning it's debated because they don't know if it's really likely being the fact that he was a member of that tribe, and that tribe's chief being like, yeah, one of my best warriors, let me give you his wife to, But who knows what actually happened, because you got the English statement, and you got the tribe statement, and then you got the time period since this happened. So some say that the account written by William Strachey in 1616 says she was living with a captain called Cocum for 2 years. Some say, however, he simply mistakenly referred to Wolfe himself, with the reference being misunderstood as one of the Powhatan's officers. So let's look at her time in England that she spent. Some English accounts state she was treated as a diplomat and a princess, meaning royalty. No harm would come to her. But best of everything, including Bacon's and other English, say she was treated like a curiosity. She was simply known as the Virginia woman to others, by most English, it is said. So there is an account, though, that says she was locked up and tortured in an exhibit showing her how savages, or showing the English how savages could be tamed. Believe me, it was actually more common than you might think at the time with the circumstances that this story started circulating. Real quick, but it wasn't uncommon in that time period. A lot of English, and not just English though, a lot of people all over Europe, they would pay people to capture natives from America, and then they would show them in circuses all around Europe and keep them in cages just like they do animals. So my belief is where it comes from, meaning that's where that stems from. That story. I do think she would not have had this happen though. She was a captain's wife first. And secondly, she was a princess. However, I do think she was more of an object of curiosity to the public more than an actual person, meaning how they looked at her and treated her. Although she was treated well at the same time. So they might have been treating her like an object, but it wasn't like they were going up to her and going, let me feel your hair, let me pull your eyeballs, can you lift up your armpit? She didn't have to go through that like some of the other natives did. They still treated her with respect, but she was still looked at as nothing but an object, like a curiosity. You know what I mean? So, although Captain John Smith, wrote of encounters with her in the United Kingdom, he claims she would give messages from her father and then take ones to give back to her father from him. That's one thing that he claimed. Now, she died at the tender age of 21, actually. So, Royal claims her last words to him was, "We all must die, but it is enough for me that my child shall live on." Now, she would have died from smallpox or 2 other diseases, but some people claim that the Queen ordered her husband to kill him or kill her before she could tell her father anything that she learned in the UK. So her funeral, they wanted to make it look right. They couldn't just do what they do to other natives. Pocahontas was a recognized queen in her tribe, and a very, very powerful Native American nation at the time, was one of the largest, and she was one of the princesses. So they couldn't be disrespectful to her body. Like most natives, they would throw them off the ship back in the day. Historically speaking, I'm not saying I'm okay with it. I'm saying historically speaking, that's exactly what they did. They would just throw them off the ship or whatever, or sell them or whatever. But with her, she was a princess. They couldn't do it. So even when she died, her husband, even if it was ordered by the queen to do that, she would still have to take her to land and give her a proper funeral. Otherwise, everything else would just set it off, man. It would just be chaos everywhere, all over the place. So anyways, let's get back on track. So the funeral actually took place March 21st, 1617, in the parish of St. George Gravesend. It is rumored that her grave is under a church chancel. The church actually, however, burned down in 1727. Now, I want to take a minute to look at her legacy. Her son's name that she was talking about, her child living on, was Thomas Wolfe. He was born on January 1615. Jane Wolfe, who was born on October 10th, 1650, and that would have been her granddaughter. John Belling, 1676, and that would have been her great grandson. And she also has 6 children herself, each of all whom married and had kids themselves. So in 1907, Pocahontas was the first Native American to be honored on a United States stamp. She also was a member of the Virginia Women in History in the year 2000. So way in the future in 2000, Virginia Women Council said, she was finally recognized as an official member of them. But it took all those years until 2000 before they did it. July 2015, the Pamunkey became the first federally recognized tribe in the state of Virginia. Now, First Lady Edith Wilson was also a descendant of Pocahontas. So, U.S. Senator Jean Shannon is also a descendant of Pocahontas. So, looking on this story, you got to ask yourself, when it comes down to Pocahontas, hold on one second, you got to ask yourself, what's truth and what's bullshit? And how could you as a person determine that? And for myself, I didn't really find an absolutely sound answer to those questions. What I did find is a legacy, and an incredible legacy. Pocahontas should be recognized for the accomplishments that she actually did. At the age of 10 years old, she took it upon herself to save the life of Captain John Smith. Now, however she did it is not the issue. Normally, when it comes down to this subject, most people would start arguing about the methodology of how they would execute her. That's not how the tribes killed people, they say. We would burn them. Okay, that's great. So even if he was tied up to a stake and getting ready to get burned up, she still tried to save him. Right? That was brave of her to do at 10 years old, and that speaks volumes to her character even at 10 years old. I can't think of too many 10-year-olds, especially 10-year-old girls, that would take such a drastic, heroic action to do something like that, or take it upon herself to do things like that. And the time frame. So let's look at the time frame here. So you're talking about a lot of events happening in a very short time period. We're talking a very short time period. So it all started when she was 10 years old, right? And she died at 21 years old, okay? So in that short time period, one of the biggest English Native American wars happened. Peace was brought between Jamestown and the natives eventually. She became a diplomat, as well as being recognized as a princess. She went to the UK, you know what I mean? Which is probably one of the first ones to do that underneath the circumstances that she was brought there with. I don't think that she was treated poorly by any means by a lot of people. Up until the point, I'm talking once she got married on, I think the only person that really hurt her in any way would have been her husband. I do feel that he probably would have tried to control her. And the reason why I'm saying that I feel like he would try to control her isn't from a biased standpoint per se. It is more or less from a psychological standpoint that I'm basing this on. Because I'm looking at a different type of culture scenario. So say you're traveling and you go overseas and you go to a different country. You don't know how to speak the language. You don't know anything about their culture. You don't know anything about how their emotions are. You don't know anything about what they believe in and how they interact. You know what I mean? What their everyday lives are like. And I'm sure that he thought during his time period that he lived in Virginia tobacco farming that he did have an understanding of them. But he based this understanding on the other English's understanding of them. And the other English would naturally understand it based on what Captain John Smith and the other soldiers would tell him. So everything originated from Captain John Smith and the soldiers back to the English, so on and so on, effect. Okay? And that's what I'm saying. So I'm sure that once he got married to her, she was so young. I think that he probably did manipulate and drastically abuse her to control her. I do think that, because I think that's the only way that Pocahontas would have went along with a lot of the stuff that happened and that she did later on in life. Now, granted, she was a very courageous woman. So even at the time that Captain John Smith was rumored to be raping her and hurting her, right? This is said by her own tribal historian. So even around that time period that all that was happening, she was like 10, 11, 12 years old. You know what I mean? 13 years old. And then she was still, she didn't say anything because she didn't want to upset her father. Because if she upset her father, they would attack immediately the colony and probably kill everybody. And she didn't want that, so she didn't say anything. And that was very courageous. It's effed up and it's messed up that anything like that would happen. But one would have to argue the sense of, I'm talking about her sense of pride, being the princess, being the chief's daughter, and how she was brought up believing that this responsibility and way of thinking is what she is supposed to do. And the fact that this all happened between 10 and 13 years old was phenomenal to me, because up until 10 years old, one of her nicknames, meaning the naughty one or ornery one, tells me that she was acted like a spoiled brat, probably, right? Let's be real. Wouldn't you come up with the same theory that that's what would happen from that? I mean, that's what I took from that. But I think over time, with all the events that happened, I think she matured. I think she's an amazing woman and should be recognized for all the courageous things she did. She did manage to keep peace amongst her tribe for a very long time. It wasn't until she went to England that everything hit the fan. See, I don't believe that she was actually allowed to see her father before she left. I don't think that happened. I don't think she was allowed to see her father. I think that if she was allowed to see her father, she wouldn't have left with John. I just don't think that would happen. I think most likely what happened was the tobacco farmer convinced him to release her. You know what I mean? And he held her captive himself in a domesticated situation at a young age in a house, isolating herself. Now, once you isolate something, this is a common tactic both in war and crime, unfortunately. It's not an uncommon tactic for people to not necessarily brainwash. Okay, you don't have to brainwash people. Everybody wants to throw out the two words there: brainwash, brainwash, brainwash. I mean, in true crime, you hear that so often: brainwash, brainwash. There's a term that comes out, Stockholm Syndrome, and you don't necessarily have to brainwash anybody to achieve this. See, in reality, it's all psychological programming, right? So I guess in a way it is brainwashing. I hate the term brainwashing. Really what happens is they isolate them, unfortunately, and they have zero access to anything that they recognize or know, and the only thing that they understand and know. So you're talking about, let's see, they said it took 2 years after marrying Pocahontas before he went to the UK. So that's 2 years that he kept her isolated away from her tribe and father. Did it happen? I don't know. So this case is actually very interesting. I highly recommend everybody getting into Pocahontas and looking into it. I hope that I presented this in a good way. Like I said, I wanted to. The true story is kind of shorter than our normal true crime episodes that we do, and I do incorporate this into a true crime episode. It is a history episode too. The aspect of the fact is, I believe that she was stolen at a young age from her family. And if the events was to happen today, in modern times, what would we say? Right? What would we say? Even if it was a wartime event, what would we say? What would the media say? How would they term it? How would they term a 11-year-old girl marrying a grown man and 2 years later being forced to move to England? How would they term that? That's all I'm saying. Anyways, this has been the story of Pocahontas, and I hope everybody actually enjoyed it. Stay tuned. I have another interesting serial killer case I'm actually getting ready to start working on, and this one is not a guy. The subject matter is going to be a female killer this time. So, everybody stay tuned, because I'll be coming your way very soon.